I've spent most of my life working in the ocean, not on it, but in it. As a saturation diver, I've spent months at a time confined to a metal tube, only venturing out into the crushing darkness to work on pipelines and rigs. The pay is great, but there's a price to everything. Most of us who work in this field don't mind the solitude. We actually prefer it. But even for someone like me, there are things in the deep that make you wish you never looked into the black. This particular job was on the Orpheus rig, a deep-sea drilling operation about 200 miles off the coast. The rig itself was massive, a floating city of metal and machinery, but my world was much smaller, a cylindrical pressurized chamber bolted beneath the main platform. From there, my partner and I would descend daily to depths over 1,000 feet, working in total darkness, aside from the artificial glow of our headlamps and the station's floodlights. I was partnered with a guy named Carter. He was younger than me, but had been diving for years, tough, funny, and a little too reckless for my taste. We'd been down in our pressurized living quarters for about 3 weeks when things started to feel off. At first, it was little things. I'd catch glimpses of movement just beyond the light's reach, but when I turned my head, there was nothing but endless black. The seabed, usually teeming with slow-moving bottom dwellers, had become eerily empty. I brought it up to Carter one evening, as we sat in our tube waiting for dinner to be pressurized down to us. "You feel like it's too quiet out there?" I asked, trying to make it sound casual. Carter just laughed. "Man, you're getting stir-crazy. It's always quiet down here. Though, I mean the fish, the crabs, the eels. It's like everything's cleared out." He shrugged. "Maybe they know something we don't." I chuckled, but his words stuck with me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Something about the way the water moved against the chamber felt wrong. Normally the ocean's movement was predictable, a rhythmic push and pull, but that night, it felt uneven, like something was out there, displacing an enormous amount of water. The next day, our job was simple: inspect a pipeline that had been giving faulty readings, and secure any loose connections. As I descended, my floodlight illuminated the familiar expanse of metal piping stretching out into the darkness. Carter worked a few meters away, humming some old rock tune through our comms. It was routine, nothing unusual, but then, I felt it, a vibration, not from the machinery or the pipeline. This was something deeper, something moving through the water itself, a low, distant hum, more like a pressure change than a sound. My gut clenched, and I turned to Carter, who had suddenly gone still. "Did you feel that?" I asked. He didn't respond right away. Then slowly, he turned his head toward me. "Yeah, I felt it." We scanned our surroundings, but there was nothing but empty blackness beyond the station's floodlights. The vibration came again, this time stronger, reverberating through my suit. Carter reached out and gripped my arm, something he'd never done before. That's when our comms crackled with static, followed by a sound that made my blood run cold, a deep, guttural moan. It didn't sound mechanical, it sounded alive. We turned toward the pipeline and saw something impossible, a shadow, darker than the surrounding water, moving against the seabed. It was massive, bigger than a whale, bigger than any known creature in the ocean, and it was coming toward us. "Up, now," I ordered, already reaching for the ascent line. Carter didn't argue. We both started pulling ourselves upward, but the thing moved faster. As we ascended, my light caught glimpses of it, translucent skin, shifting, undulating tentacles that stretched impossibly long, and eyes, too many eyes, reflective and watching. Did something wrapped around my ankle. I screamed, kicking hard, but the grip was like steel. Carter turned, his own eyes wide with horror, as he reached for me. He pulled out his dive knife and slashed at the appendage. The moment the blade connected, the thing let out a high-pitched shriek that vibrated through my skull. The tentacle recoiled, and I scrambled upward. We hit the airlock hard, slamming it shut, as the water drained. As soon as our helmets came off, we looked at each other, breathing heavily. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Carter whispered, "What the hell was that?" I had no answer. The company didn't believe us. They reviewed the dive footage, but the moment the shadow had appeared, the cameras had malfunctioned, showing nothing but static. Typical. They dismissed it as nitrogen narcosis, fatigue, or stress. They pulled us out a week later, saying they needed fresh divers to continue the job. A month later, I heard a rumor. A crew of 6 went down to finish our work. None of them came back. The company blamed a catastrophic equipment failure, but I knew better. Something is down there, something that shouldn't exist, and it's waiting. Story 2. I spent 20 years as a deep-sea welder, repairing pipelines and structures at the bottom of the ocean. Most of my work kept me between 200 and 500 feet below the surface, dangerous enough in itself. But one job took me far deeper, past the midnight zone, where sunlight had long given up trying to reach. The corporation that hired me was secretive. They were retrofitting an old underwater research station resting at an impossible depth, nearly 2,000 feet down. I was part of a small crew assigned to reinforce the structure, which had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. No one explained why they wanted it operational again, and we knew better than to ask. The descent into the abyss was uneventful. Our diving bell settled into the docking bay with a soft clang, and the pressurized doors sealed behind us. The station's interior smelled of rust and stale air. The only signs of previous occupants were scattered personal belongings, left to rot in the damp. We were given 3 weeks to complete our work. Our schedule was brutal: 6-hour shifts outside in the crushing depths, welding beams and sealing cracks, followed by an equal time locked in decompression chambers. It was exhausting, but tolerable, until we saw the first sign that something wasn't right. On the 5th day, I was patching a fissure near the western wing, when my torchlight caught something in the gloom. At first, I thought it was a school of jellyfish drifting through the water, but as my vision adjusted, I realized they weren't drifting at all. They were watching me. Translucent, elongated figures hovered just beyond the reach of my light. Their massive black eyes reflected nothing, absorbing all light, like twin pools of ink. Their bodies shimmered, distorting as if they weren't fully real. I couldn't tell how many there were, 10, maybe 20. They pulsed in and out of focus, moving without movement, shifting positions without breaking the water around them. I turned off my torch for a moment, hoping to convince myself it was some visual trick. When I flicked it back on, they were closer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pushed off from the structure and radioed my partner, Mike. "I've got something out here." Static answered me. "Mike." The silence was absolute. Even my breathing felt muffled in the pressurized suit. My limbs were going stiff with fear. When I turned to face the station, I saw something moving inside the observation window. It wasn't Mike. A figure stood in the control room, silhouetted against the emergency lighting, its head tilted in an unnatural way, watching me. But the station had been empty when we arrived. No one else was supposed to be here. I abandoned my work and kicked toward the airlock. The figures in the water remained still, their huge eyes following my movements. I slammed my hand against the station's control panel, waiting for the pressure to equalize so I could get inside. It took an agonizing 60 seconds. I kept my eyes shut the entire time, praying nothing would grab me before the door opened. The second I stepped inside, I ripped off my helmet and gasped for air. The halls were silent, no sign of anyone near the control room. But something was off. The condensation on the walls had smeared, as if something had been dragged along the metal. I found Mike in his quarters, shaking uncontrollably. He wouldn't speak at first, only pressing his back against the wall, his face white with terror. I tried to snap him out of it, but he kept mumbling the same phrase over and over. "We shouldn't be here. They told us not to come back." I asked him who they were, but he just kept repeating it, his fingers gripping the bed frame so hard his knuckles turned bloodless. That night, I dreamed of dark water, not drowning, something worse. It was pulling at me, whispering without words, trying to drag me down into a place I knew I wouldn't return from. When I woke, the station was dark, the emergency power was flickering, Mike was gone. I searched every inch of the structure, but there was no trace of him. His suit was still in the storage locker, untouched. He hadn't left the station. He had just vanished. The company refused to send help, saying we needed to finish the contract before they would extract us. But there were only 2 of us left now, and the other diver, Jenkins, was starting to crack. He claimed he could hear something moving in the vents at night, that it whispered his name in a voice that sounded just like his own. By the 10th day, I had stopped trying to work. The figures outside never left. They didn't attack. They didn't even move anymore. They only watched, waiting. Jenkins tried to escape. He thought if he swam fast enough, he could reach the surface. We found his body 2 days later, floating just outside the station, his suit intact, his face frozen in an expression of unimaginable horror. I spent the next week in silence, rationing my oxygen, and hoping the company would come early. They didn't. On the final day, when the extraction bell finally arrived, I felt my sanity unraveling. I stepped into the chamber, barely able to focus, but just before the doors sealed, I heard something whisper my name. The last thing I saw before the station disappeared into the dark was a figure standing in the observation window. It was me. Story 3. I've spent most of my career working in the abyssal depths of the ocean. As a saturation diver, it's a job that demands precision, resilience, and the ability to keep your wits about you when the only thing separating you from oblivion is a pressurized suit and a tank of mixed gases. I used to think I'd seen everything the deep had to offer, until I encountered something that made me question everything I knew about the ocean, about life, and about survival. This took place on a deep-sea drilling operation, about 200 miles off the coast. The company I worked for had just established a new drilling platform, and it was our job to inspect and maintain the piping system being installed on the seafloor. There were only 2 of us stationed in the pressurized habitat beneath the surface, a steel coffin attached to a dive bell that we used to make our descents. My partner was an experienced diver, named Rick. We were used to the job, to the darkness, the pressure, the isolation, but nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered. The first week was routine. We ran the usual inspections, secured the pipeline connections, and navigated through the eerily silent trenches. The thing about working at depths like this is that you're never truly alone. Strange fish, glowing creatures, the occasional large predator moving through the gloom. But we never saw anything out of the ordinary. Until the start of our 2nd week, it began with movement. I would catch glimpses of something, just at the edge of my visibility range, something large, moving just beyond the light. At first I chalked it up to a giant squid, or some other deep-sea oddity, but the way it moved wasn't natural. It wasn't swimming, it was observing. Rick noticed it too. One evening, while running a final systems check, he turned to me, his voice distorted through the comms. "You see that?" I turned my light in the direction he was pointing, but there was nothing there, just darkness, shifting water, and the ever-present pressure of the deep. "It's probably just a shark," I said, though I didn't believe it. That Rick wasn't convinced. He insisted he saw something humanoid, with elongated limbs, and impossibly dark eyes. The next night, it got worse. We were outside the habitat, making adjustments to the drill structure, when something massive shifted in the water behind us. My entire body tensed. It was close enough that I could feel the displacement of water. I turned my light in its direction, and for the briefest moment, I saw it. It was humanoid, but grotesquely stretched, its body sleek like an eel's, with elongated limbs that ended in claw-like appendages. Its eyes were massive, black, and empty, reflecting my own horror back at me. It was gone in an instant,
vanishing into the abyss. Rick swore under his breath. "Tell me you saw that." I nodded, gripping my tether tighter. We backed toward the habitat, moving as quickly as our suits allowed. We reached the airlock and cycled in, barely speaking as we removed our gear. Rick paced, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "What the hell was that?" I had no answer. We decided not to report it. What would we even say? That we saw something impossible, that we were being watched by something that had no business existing. No one would believe us, and worse, it might cost us our jobs. That the sightings didn't stop. Every night, the thing came closer. It would hover just outside the habitat, pressing its grotesque hands against the thick glass, watching us. Sometimes, there were more than one. They would float there, unmoving, eyes locked on us, waiting. Rick started losing it first. He barely slept, kept muttering about how they were whispering to him through the walls. I didn't hear anything at first, but then the static on our comms turned to faint murmurs, words I didn't recognize, layered and guttural. The last night before our extraction was the worst. We were making our final ascent when the creatures attacked. One of them wrapped its elongated fingers around Rick's tether, yanking him back toward the darkness. He screamed, struggling against its grip, but it was too strong. I grabbed his tether, pulling with all my strength, but more of them appeared, their clawed hands reaching, grasping. My vision blurred with panic. I activated my emergency lift, my suit jerking me upward. Rick's screams faded as the creatures dragged him down into the abyss. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was in the decompression chamber, my body shaking uncontrollably. They told me I was found drifting near the surface, my oxygen nearly depleted. They never found Rick. Official reports stated it was an accident, equipment failure, a tragic loss. I know better. Something lives down there, something that shouldn't exist, and it's waiting for the next foolish soul to wander too deep, to stay too long. I left that job, but I still dream about the abyss, about Rick, and about the things that live in the darkness, watching, waiting, because the ocean doesn't belong to us, and there are places we were never meant to go. Story 4. I never used to believe in the stories. I spent 20 years working in the deep, descending into the abyss, where the pressure could snap your bones like twigs. The sea was my home, my cathedral of solitude. That there are things down there, things that shouldn't exist, things that see us as intruders. It was my last contract. I had already put in my resignation, and was counting the days before I could finally leave the ocean behind. The company had sent us to a remote site, farther than we'd ever been, over a trench so deep our sonar barely returned anything but whispers. Our job was routine: set up a pipeline, ensure the connections were secure, and get out. Simple, or so we thought. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. The deep is never truly quiet. There's always something whale song in the distance, the occasional pop of shifting currents, the unseen life lurking beyond the glow of our floodlights. But that night, there was nothing. No fish, no movement, just an unnatural stillness that wrapped around us like a shroud. We laughed it off at first, blaming it on the depth, on the currents, on anything but the feeling creeping up our spines. But when we descended, the laughter stopped. The moment I stepped onto the seabed, I knew, I felt it, a presence, something watching. Our lights barely cut through the blackness, illuminating only fragments of the trench below. As we worked, my partner, Jenkins, kept glancing over his shoulder, muttering about shadows that weren't there. I told him to focus, that our minds were playing tricks on us. Then I saw it. At the edge of the light, something moved, slow, deliberate, a slithering motion, like eels coiling around one another, but bigger, so much bigger. I called out to Jenkins, but he was already scrambling backward, his breathing ragged over the comms. "Something's down here," he hissed. I turned, my light sweeping across the trench, and that's when I saw it fully. It was enormous, stretching out beyond the reach of our lights. Its body was sinuous, shifting, a mass of writhing tendrils that pulsed and flexed, and its face, God, its face, was almost human, but stretched, elongated, with wide, empty eyes that glowed like dying embers. Then it moved. One of the tendrils shot out, lashing around Jenkins' leg. He screamed, his voice distorted by the static of the radio. I lunged, grabbing onto him, but the thing was strong, inhumanly strong. It was dragging him toward the trench. "Cut the tether," I shouted, my hand scrambling for the knife strapped to his suit. I saw the terror in his eyes as he fumbled for his own blade. The creature pulled harder, and Jenkins' scream turned into a gurgling choke. Then I saw its mouth open. Rows of needle-thin teeth lined an impossible maw that stretched across its entire torso. It wasn't just pulling him down, it was feeding. I slashed the tether. Jenkins shot upward, severed from the creature's grasp. But in that moment, the thing turned to me. The lights above flickered as something massive passed overhead. More of them. I saw them, silhouetted against the faint glow of our vessel, circling, watching. I didn't think, I just ran, my boots kicking up clouds of silt. My heart slammed against my ribs as I reached for the ascent line, my fingers barely brushing it before another tendril whipped past my face. I scrambled, gripping the line as hard as I could, kicking off the seabed. Jenkins' voice was gone, his comm silent. The ascent was agonizing. Every second, I expected something to grab my leg, to feel those teeth sink into my flesh. When I finally breached the surface, I was shaking so badly, I could barely haul myself onto the platform. The crew was shouting, their faces white with fear. I ripped off my helmet and gasped for air, but all I could say was, "They're down there, they're waiting." We lost Jenkins that night. The company ruled it an accident, a freak current pulling him into the trench. But I know better. Something watches from the depths, something old, something hungry, and it knows we are here. Story 5. The ocean has always been a place of mystery, a vast and endless abyss where light fades and shadows stretch in unnatural ways. The thought of sinking, of being swallowed by the deep, has haunted many minds, but none more than mine. My name is Claire, and I once loved the sea. Now, I can't even hear the sound of waves without feeling like something is watching me, waiting to drag me back down. I was a marine biologist, drawn to the ocean by a fascination with its creatures, that what I found beneath the surface was never meant to be seen by human eyes. Our team was stationed on a research vessel above the Mariana Trench, studying the bioluminescent life forms that thrived in the dark. We had deployed a deep-sea submersible, and it was my turn to descend, to venture into the silence below. The descent was smooth at first. The radio crackled with my team's voices, a comforting tether to the world above. But as I passed the 10,000 foot mark, the communication became static-filled, their voices distant. Then, at 15,000 feet, they cut out entirely. I was alone. The lights of the sub illuminated the trench walls, revealing creatures that twisted and coiled away from the glow. Then I saw it, a pale shape in the distance, a woman. She floated, her long black hair flowing unnaturally, her eyes open but empty, her mouth stretched wide in a silent scream. I froze. No diver should be here, no human should be this deep. I adjusted the lights, but in the second it took, she was closer, right outside the glass, her hand pressed against the window, and then she whispered my name. I screamed. I don't remember if I reached for the controls, or if something else did, but the sub lurched, spinning into the black. Warnings blared. The pressure gauge flickered erratically. Then, all at once the lights died. I was left in utter darkness, and I wasn't alone. The glass cracked, not from the pressure, but from something pressing against it. Fingernails scraped down the hull. I felt movement behind me, though I was locked inside the sub. Something breathed against my neck, cold and wet. Then the lights flickered back, and I saw my own reflection in the glass. But it wasn't mine. The woman was behind me, her face inches from my own. I could feel her presence, her rage, her hunger. I slammed my hand against the emergency ascent. The sub shot upward, rattling violently as it went. When I surfaced, my team found me curled in the cockpit, babbling incoherently. I don't remember what I told them. I don't remember how I got back to land, but I do remember her face, and I know she's still waiting, drifting just beneath the waves, waiting for me to return. I never will. Story 6. The first time Emily saw her reflection move on its own, she convinced herself she was imagining things. She had just moved into a new apartment, nothing fancy, just a small place downtown with creaky wooden floors, and a draft that whispered through the hallways at night. The mirror in the bedroom came with the place. It was old, the glass slightly warped, with a dark wooden frame covered in intricate carvings that almost looked like faces if you stared long enough. The first time it happened, she had been brushing her hair before bed. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw her reflection hesitate, just a fraction of a second too long before mimicking her movement. She laughed it off, blaming exhaustion, and went to sleep. But it kept happening. A week later, she was applying makeup when she saw it again. She blinked, but the reflection didn't. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but her stomach clenched with cold dread. She waved her hand. Her reflection followed, except for the eyes. They stayed locked on hers, unblinking. That night, she draped a blanket over the mirror before bed. She didn't want to see it anymore. Then came the whispering, soft at first, like the rustling of fabric. She thought it was just the wind slipping through the old apartment's cracks. But soon, the sound formed words. "Let me out." Emily shot up in bed, her heart hammering in her chest. She held her breath, straining to listen. Silence. She told herself she had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even sleep paralysis. But every night, it returned, sometimes faint, sometimes clear as day. "Let me out, Emily." She never told anyone. Who would believe her? It was just an old mirror. That's what she told herself. Until one night, when she made the mistake of lifting the blanket. She shouldn't have looked. Her reflection wasn't mimicking her anymore. It stood still, staring back, a faint, unnatural smile curling its lips. Her own lips weren't moving. The reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, its fingers pale and too long. Then it spoke. "I've waited so long." Emily screamed, and stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The crash shattered the silence, and the reflection's face twisted with something like hunger. The whispering turned into a shriek, high-pitched and inhuman, shaking the glass. She grabbed the closest thing, a chair, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, sending shards flying across the room. She collapsed to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the whispering started again, except now, it wasn't coming from the mirror. It was coming from behind her. Slowly trembling, she turned her head, and there, in the broken reflection, something was crawling out, and it looked just like her. Story 7. The old television sat in the corner of the living room, a relic from the 80s, with a thick glass screen and bulky dials. It had belonged to my grandmother before she passed, and despite its age, my parents refused to get rid of it. They claimed it was a family heirloom. I thought it was just outdated junk. One evening, while home alone, I flipped through channels, frustrated that nothing was on. The screen buzzed with static for a second before a channel appeared, one I didn't recognize. The number in the corner read 000. A show was playing, but it wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The picture was grainy, black and white, and it looked like a live feed of a dimly lit room. At first, nothing happened, just an empty space, a chair in the center, and an old clock on the wall. I thought maybe it was some kind of avant-garde art film. But then something shifted in the shadows. A figure stepped into frame. It was a woman. Her back was turned to the camera, long hair matted, and dripping, as if she had just climbed out of a lake. She stood motionless, her head slightly tilted to the side. I waited for her to do something, to turn around, but she didn't move. Minutes passed. My hands felt clammy against the remote. Then, the clock on the wall started ticking backward. A sharp chill ran down my spine. The woman's head twitched slightly, as though she heard something. Then, in one sudden movement, she spun around. Her face was wrong. There were no eyes, only gaping black sockets, and her mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, frozen in a silent scream. Her head jerked, as if she was struggling to move closer to the screen. My breath caught, as the camera started zooming in on her face, the static crackling louder and louder. It felt like she was looking at me. Then she whispered my name. The TV shut off by itself. I sat there, heart hammering, staring at my own reflection in the black screen. It must have been a trick of my mind. The wind, something logical. That's what I told myself. Until the TV clicked back on by itself. The woman was gone, but the chair was now empty, rocking slightly, as if someone had just been sitting there. And then my phone buzzed. A single message appeared on my screen. Turn around. I didn't. Instead, I ran. I slept with the lights on that night, and the next morning, I begged my parents to throw the TV away. They laughed, said I must have been dreaming. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, the static and the soft creak of a chair rocking somewhere in the house.